let's try to get back into our official into the interview here. So don't remember what we were talking about before, but let's go into your final point of your thesis here.
Yeah.
Because in the conversation we've been having, we're talking about the adverse effects, we're talking about all these sort of nuances, and yet the thesis is these are happening, and why aren't we talking about them? Why are they, and the fact that we're not talking about them makes them worse. And how did it come to be like this? Right. And we talked about the two of those reasons so far, just very quickly summarizing them, shifting from a religious goal to a sort of psychological goal, and the decontextualization of meditation practices from a religious to a secular context. Mm-hmm. And the third one you put in is the mainstream media representations. These are my words. The mainstream media representations of meditation is distortedly positive, as if it were a cure-all for, or a panacea for, all mental psychological challenges in our lives, which is greatly characterized by its representation in the wellness industry. And as you're breaking that down, you talk about you talk about a number of things, but one of the things is around what happens when meditation becomes commodified and how that would influence how it's represented. So I do want to ask you about the sort of like weird distortions that emerge from science to media. But first, let's talk about like what you present as the two problems that arise when meditation becomes commodified and how that influences this sort of cure-all narrative that tends to be represented in the mainstream.
Mm-hmm. I can't remember what were the two problems that I presented around commodification. Like I mean, I can speak to it, but I can't remember if I presented it that way. I mean, I think, from a really cynical perspective, you could say, oh, well, adverse effects are not spoken of in commodified meditation because it's bad for business. And, and people have presented that viewpoint. But I think I say in the book that, I don't actually think that that's that is the case. I mean, maybe it is now that adverse effects are becoming, more known and spoken about. But I think, I just think that people didn't know about these things. And I don't think that the people who are setting up meditation apps or, your average coach who wants to teach mindfulness, like, I just don't think they had the deep knowledge of this content or the traditions. I don't think there was anything, intentional or, about it. I just don't think they had the information. And certainly I've seen there a lot of interest from meditation teachers and from psychotherapists who now have this awareness of adverse effects, and they're interested and they're keen to learn about it, to learn, how to implement safeguards and ensure that it doesn't happen to their patients or their students, and they're keen to learn about, trainings and resources. So I think that, most people are coming from a good place. It was probably just this place of ignorance. And, going back to the media thing, I think it's because meditation has been presented in the West in this overly, positive and overly simplified way. Yeah.
Well, you're much more, I feel like you're much more generous right now than you were in your book because,
oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, mind you, I read this, properly read it, 8 months ago or something like this. And then, skim through it and sort of, read, like I just said, around my notes from the book. So I might be missing something, but some of the things you bring up include that the influence of like celebrity gurus and celebrity meditators and how they characterize it and how that gets blasted out by the media because celebrities bring attention and so on and so forth. You also talk, at the beginning before the interview, we were talking about Matthew Remski. You mentioned Conspirituality. That's the name of his podcast. You have a quote in here when you talk about how how the sort of like all positive representation of meditation could actually be used as sort of as a tactic by cults and cult like groups to sort of hook people in. So once they're in, there's use the term this self-sealing narrative of what the experience is to keep people stuck inside of this cult thinking. A little bit more generous, you just talked about how the sort of translation from the researchers who are trying to have a good look to the journalists who then report on that gets distorted because the media, the news media, is about sale of information and the capturing of attention, not necessarily the education of the masses. And then with regards to money, you said, and because I have the quote book right in front of me, you said that there are two obvious issues related to the commodification of meditation that are directly relevant to the question of why meditation has been presented so positively in the mainstream media. The first is that of power and influence. Successful meditation teachers and meditation businesses with large marketing budgets are able to direct the popular media discourse surrounding meditation via their marketing and public relation efforts, which then shape the thoughts and perception of the general public. The second issue of that is that of profit. Simply put, it is commercially advantageous for meditation teachers and businesses to present meditation as an overtly positive way in order to gain business. A basic consequence of meditation for sale is that meditation-related businesses exist primarily to make revenue. So I like that you're much more generous now, and I believe that to be true. But you definitely take a hard look at.
And that's the thing. Like, I am happy to consider all perspectives. Like, and I think like that's true. I mean, these businesses do. So the most powerful apps and businesses do help to control the narrative, around meditation. And I just don't think that there's necessarily evil intent behind it. I don't think that they're sitting there on all this information on adverse effects and going, oh, we're not going to talk about this because, we need to control the narrative. I think I genuinely believe it came from a place of ignorance. And I think it's only since, like, and this is my whole book, is like, no one talked about it. Like, why aren't these things being spoken about? And it really didn't come to, to the popular media until I think, I don't know, maybe 2015 was when Willoughby Britton's work started to gain traction. And so when I started to do this research, I remember talking to her and, and there was a lot of pushback, and she was a real pioneer because people still didn't quite believe that it could be a real thing. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's my thought on the commodification. In terms of media representation, I think that has been, and we can talk about how psychedelics are being presented in the media as well, but there's, there are major issues there. I mean, so two of the tactics that I spoke about in the book, I mean, one is the use of these tropes or motifs around meditation. So often, you'd see these stock images of a white, beautiful, woman sitting in full lotus, like meditating. And it's, this idea of the tranquil meditator that's like constantly pushed out in the media. And then you have, this fascinating history, like historical association of meditation and celebrity, which I just think is fascinating. And I mean, maybe we're seeing a little bit of it now with psychedelics, but I don't think to that full extent, where you've had this kind of since the even, in the 1800s, like the Madame Blavatsky from the Theosophical Society, like she was a type of celebrity, but it's kind of been associated with these celebrity type figures who have promoted the technique. And then, you have consumers who are like, oh, well, they're very aspirational. Obviously, what they're doing is working. I'm interested in that too. But particularly from around the 1960s with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, all of a sudden meditation teachers and gurus were becoming celebrities themselves, which is another fascinating phenomenon. I think a lot of how a lot, like probably most of how we think about meditation has been influenced by this very specific media narrative.